Can you be forced into an HOA and made to follow their rules? About 15 years ago, my brother bought a farm in Ontario, Canada, near a medium-sized city. In the last 5 years or so, an upper middle class subdivision popped up beside of him, which for the most part wasn't much of a problem. Today, he had the president of the HOA for the subdivision come over to him and tried to issue him demands and fines for violating their rules. His farm was originally established in the late 1800s, and the subdivision was built around 2010, so it's not like he was part of them when they were built. The HOA is saying that he is creating a public nuisance by spreading manure on his fields. He rents most of them out to a neighbor since he works in the city for the most part, along with demanding that he stop doing things like using his smoker, using farm equipment near the subdivision, cease commercial enterprises, and stop using his impact gun because the noise and smoke is apparently very disruptive to the community a kilometer or so away. The president of the HOA also demanded a ridiculous amount in past dues, along with other fines that he needs to supposedly pay to the president and not the HOA. My brother took the papers and told the guy in no kind words to never come back with papers demanding money unless he was with a lawyer or a cop that'll back him up on his bullcrap. He also has an appointment with a lawyer Thursday to talk about this, but in the meantime, I just wanted to know if there was anything my brother should do to prepare for his meeting with the lawyer. The only issue I think he might have is that he has guard donkeys protecting his wife's sheep. She loves knitting and creating things with the wool, so he has some of the meanest donkeys I've ever seen guarding them from coyotes. Some of the kids from the subdivision come around to look at the sheep, but he has a lot of signs warning about the dangers of the donkeys. Realistically, he can't secure a kilometer or so of fence fully against children, so should he be worried? He has chicken wires stapled up along the fence so no little kids can easily crawl through, and there's signs to warn the older ones that the donkeys are not to be trifled with. Is there anything he should be doing or working on to help himself out? We both think the president of the HOA is talking out of his butt, but I'm slightly worried that if a kid gets bitten or trampled by a donkey, that he will be in trouble, and the president of the HOA could use that against him. What should my brother do aside from document to help himself against the HOA president and to make sure that no little kids get hurt by the donkeys? Is he going about this right, or is there something else that he should do to legally help himself? Do you agree with this answer? If your brother owns the land and did not incorporate his property into the HOA, then the HOA can do nothing about his farm. He should have his lawyer write a cease and desist letter to stop the harassment about the HOA. He should also talk to the lawyer about the farm animals potentially being an attractive nuisance. I don't imagine on a farm that animals would be, though, and what the appropriate signage he'd need, such as beware of donkey and no trespassing. The president of the HOA and the parents of the injured child would be two completely different parties, unless it's the president's child, so the HOA can't do anything about that. The lawyer is his best bet. Explain the situation clearly, bring the land deed and a survey if he has it, and deliver a timeline of events. An update. As it turns out, my brother already had his property surveyed when he was working with a neighbor to rent out some of the fields, and from what he says, there's a 0% chance that anyone from the subdivision actually owns any of his land. He debated getting another survey done, but he was pretty sure that the letter from the lawyer would be enough. The lawyer seemed pretty helpful, and my brother sounded really happy with how the meeting went. Apparently, it didn't look to the lawyer like he was doing anything that couldn't be seen as normal farm practices, so he shouldn't worry about being sued for the spreading of the manure. The donkeys and the sheep were discussed, but they ended up deciding that he would just increase his insurance, add more warning signs, and fully wrap the wooden fence with new sheep fence, along with replacing the older fencing. He also got a letter that, from what he read to me, seems to cover the fact that he isn't doing anything that could be considered unusual farming practices. It also showed that he actually owns the land and said that, unless the HOA has a dissenting survey, they have no claim to his land. It ended up saying that the HOA president should contact the lawyer and not my brother if he has any further issues. Interestingly enough, the lawyer couldn't find any homeowners association under the name the guy had given my brother. He said it's possible they just formed or changed their name, but more than likely it's just some busybody sticking his nose where it doesn't belong. There's a small chance that they unofficially formed an HOA and never actually did anything but give themselves a name and some rules. But the lawyer said that if they did, it wouldn't change the fact that they can't force him to join. So my brother and his wife are happy that things seem to have been resolved. He bought a security camera for the front door so that he can have a recording if the guy shows up again, but that's hopefully the end of it. Now, I'm no lawyer, but if you don't know about a situation like this and things can go wrong, it's best to get somebody that knows what the heck they're talking about. HOA mistakes me for my cousin's wife, posted by Deleted. Back when I was 18, I'm 26-year-old female now, I was helping my cousin, 30 male, and his newlywed wife, 25 female, move into their new home that has an HOA. I was carrying boxes into the house, and I was just covered in sweat. As I was enjoying some rest with a bottle of water, one of the HOA members came up to me to introduce himself. We exchanged pleasantries and then asked, "How long have you and your husband been married?" After that, I told him to please wait and brought in the actual married couple to meet the HOA member. They came out and the man's face dropped. Then he faked a phone call from the HOA and left. We didn't know anything was wrong at the time. Not even a week after they moved in, I get a call on my cell phone from my cousin. He said that the police were raiding his house for possible drugs. I know my cousin. He has a criminal record of a Boy Scout. Every time he gets a prescription for painkillers, he either shreds the note or dumps the pills in the toilet due to fear of addiction. The police found nothing and left, and they did apologize. The very next day, his wife was stopped by the police in her own driveway. They said that she was suspected for prostitution, even though she was wearing a pantsuit from her job as a cardiologist. They called her hospital to confirm her whereabouts, and she was let go. The police came back the day after that after someone claimed that his wife was breaking into their own home. How can someone break into their home through the front door and with their own keys? After a month, the HOA came up to them claiming that they are a nuisance and attempted to put a lien on the house for so many calls to the police. Luckily, my cousin's brother is a lawyer and fought against the lien in court. At court, the HOA member that met the couple on day one was revealed to be the one that sent the cops after them so they can be kicked out of the neighborhood. As it turns out, that person testified that he didn't want their kind in his perfect neighborhood. Everyone in that room was dumbstruck. The HOA lawyer immediately dropped the case, apologized to my cousin and his wife. That HOA member was kicked out of the neighborhood for racism. As it turns out, he also called the police on every black and brown person that even passed by his house. Since then, they moved out of the neighborhood after she got a better job offer in her field. I forgot to say, she is black and my cousin is white. That's blatant racism, and the HOA member deserves the punishment that he received. My mother has forged my signature on checks and stolen $60,000, posted by Angel in Blue Jeans. I kind of don't know where to begin. Right now, I'm trying to figure out what kind of attorney I need. My mother has been forging my signature on checks addressed to me since I was 18. There have been 4 checks in the amount of $15,000 each, totaling to $60,000. The money I get is from a lawsuit from when I was a minor, but I had no idea about any of it because I was really young when it happened. I have since reported her to the insurance company's fraud department, my local police, I live in Illinois, she lives in California, my bank, as well as USPS, since she has been stealing and opening my mail to get these checks. I decided to send her and my dad an email outlining everything I know with the proof, which is the forged check and the bank statements, and she texted me this morning denying all of it, but in the same breath said that I owed them that money because they raised me. I'm starting to ramble. She has since decided to just ignore me, so I'm going to look into an attorney. It seems like it's insanely expensive just to get a consultation, so I'm wondering which specialty of attorney I should be looking for. Is this a family matter, or does the $60,000 in fraud and mail theft make it a different specialty? Now, a lot of the story's been left out because I just assumed I'd need to find a lawyer. The injury occurred when I was 4 or 5, and I'm now 23. When the lawsuit happened, my mother was not even legally my mother yet, as I was later adopted by her. The check started coming when I was 18. I didn't even know about the injury or lawsuit, let alone that I was owed money, so I had no idea that any checks were coming. I just found out about this very, very recently. I know the name of the company paying me out, but I don't even know the name of the establishment where I was hurt as a kid. I filed a police report in my state as the PD where she lives said it's technically out of their jurisdiction. I'm a bit confused because the crime was committed there, but they said that the crime has to be reported based off of where the victim is. I filed a fraud report with the insurance company who has been sending the checks to my mother's address. Everything has been updated to my address and information, and a passcode was put on the account that only I know. They are mailing me paperwork with copies of the forged checks as well as an affidavit I have to sign regarding the fraud. I made a report with my bank, and they were jerks and said there's nothing they can do and were extremely short with me. Finally, I made a report with UPS Investigation Department. While the checks were sent to my mother's address, where I lived as a kid, they still had my legal name on them, not hers. So she opened mail that wasn't addressed to her. Now, while the crime was committed in California and I live in Illinois, I believe the settlement was in Colorado. That's where I lived before I was adopted, and that's where the accident occurred. My aunt was the one who told me about the money and helped me find out who the insurance company was. My aunt, mom's sister, told me that when my now mom and dad adopted me, they had to submit paperwork to prove guardianship with the insurance company, and that's when the company changed the address from my childhood home in Colorado to their home in California. Even though my adopted mom committed the crimes, my adopted dad knew everything that was going on. They both profited off the money, and they did a huge backyard remodel. OP updates with, I'm not being nonchalant, I'm just more in shock. My mom is middle and high and lower high class. I'm quite literally dirt poor and pregnant. I'm adopted, so I know that she's never really viewed me as her own. It just seems unreal to me that she could steal $60K from me and then talk crap about me to my family because I couldn't afford prenatals around my birthday. Boyfriend of 5 years cheated on me, so I ruined his RuneScape account. I used to play RuneScape, so this is going to be really fun. My boyfriend and I had met online well over 6 years ago through an online game by the name of RuneScape. He was 14 and I was 17, but it had felt like we had been friends forever. We both played the game very often and connected through it, eventually leading us to start a long-distance relationship. Things began to escalate as the years went on, and we began seeing each other in person every few months or so. We were about 1,500 miles apart, so one of our main priorities for the future was moving in together and closing the distance. My job had prevented us from doing that, but we had finally set a date for me to move in with him in December of this year. Our relationship never had any serious issues, and I was more than happy to have him in my life as he was happy to have me. As I got older, I began to play RuneScape less and less as work took up most of my time. He continued to play regularly, if not more than he had when I first met him. He could never really hold down a job and barely had an income, but I supported him throughout the years and even paid his rent from across the country after he moved out of his parents' house a few years ago. I never really minded it because he was a sweetheart, but we began to have problems. In November of last year, I couldn't help pay his monthly rent. I was short on cash after having to pay my own living expenses alongside car repairs and bills that I owed to the state, and I just couldn't afford to support him at the time. When I called him one night to discuss it, he freaked out and started crying that he didn't want to live with his parents again. I tried calming him down and even suggesting that I could help him find a temporary job until I could start providing for him again, but he wasn't having it. He claimed his parents would abuse him if he returned home, which I know for a fact isn't true because him and his parents have stayed with me several times. They've given him the world. I eventually did calm him down, but he remained passive-aggressive this entire night, and we eventually hung up. Because I cared about him, I reached out to his father the next day and informed him that he would probably be moving back home after his lease expired that month. I explained how I wouldn't be able to afford paying for his living for a month or two, and if there were any local jobs he could work in order to, make an income. But apparently, a friend of his father needed help managing a small warehouse for his business and was looking to potentially hire my boyfriend for the season. It paid $15 an hour and was super easy, like lifting boxes, sweeping the floors, and taking inventory. I brought it up to my boyfriend that same night, and he was not having it. Not only did he not want to work in a crappy warehouse, but he didn't want to work at all. All he planned to do day in, day out was play RuneScape. I brought up a few other job listings I'd found in his area, and he immediately shot them all down as well. He then had the audacity to comment about how he thinks I should work harder and possibly work a second job. I kept my composure and simply argued against it until we eventually hung up. I collapsed on my bed and cried for a good hour or two afterwards because of the intense emotional stress I was under. Not only do I work 8 hours a day, 6 days a week, I'm also an industrial meteorologist. If I remember correctly, that's a lot more work than playing RuneScape every day and using my Hulu account. I really considered breaking up with him right that moment, but I changed my mind and decided to give him another chance. Looking back on it, big mistake. I messaged him throughout the night and we sort of made up, but I was still a little uneasy about the entire event. He had moved back with his parents by the time December had come, and I began to help him look for jobs while he wasted his life away playing video games. I eventually persuaded him to start working at a small retail store near his house, and he thankfully began to make some money. I would still buy him video games and transfer him money like normal because I spoiled him, and our relationship began to feel somewhat okay again. Last month, both him and I put our money together to fly him across the US to stay with me for 4 days. We hadn't seen each other in person since last summer, so we were both looking forward to it. He arrived and we had a great time for the first few days because he could actually take me on dates for once with his new income. Everything was perfect until I caught a glimpse of his phone's lock screen while he was taking a shower. "When are you gonna leave her?" the Discord message read. I could have ran into the bathroom and snapped his neck in that moment, but I kept myself together as best as I could without killing him. I had never felt so used and disrespected or hated in my entire life. When he came out of the bathroom, I gave him a fake smile, but I genuinely hated him from that moment on. He could have dropped dead on the floor, and I would have spit on him. I spent the remainder of the night watching him play RuneScape, and I remained very quiet. He took notice of this and asked me if everything was okay, and I lied and I told him I was fine. When it came time for him to go to sleep, I let that effort climb into bed with me and he tried initiating stuff because it was our final night together. I rejected as politely as I could without tearing his member completely off. He was disappointed, but it went out like a light. Immediately after he went to sleep, I reached over and unplugged his phone and started digging through his messages with that girl. I feared that I had misinterpreted the message I had seen, but I was completely right after all. Not only had he been cheating on me, he had been doing so for nearly 6 months, leading me to believe that he hooked up with another girl directly after I couldn't pay for his living in November. I scrolled through probably 100,000 messages and wanted to vomit my insides out by the end of it. He had talked crap about me, claiming I was emotionally abusive, just as he had done with his parents, and even sent this girl my nudes so they could pick me apart physically. When morning came, I had slept in because of how late I was up reading his messages. I woke up to find him on my computer playing RuneScape and eating my food. It was like all of our relationship had been wiped from my mind and he was now an evil stranger sitting in my house. I wanted to scream at him and I wanted to tear him apart and kick him out of my house onto the street, but I didn't. In fact, I gave him as much love and attention as I could muster that morning because I wanted to leave things feeling like normal between us. I dropped him off at the airport and we had a quick and somber goodbye before I left him forever, unbeknownst to him. I drove back home as calmly as I could before crying my eyes out in a mix of complete anger and emotional pain. I ended up kicking my bed frame so hard that the wood split and I had to buy a new one recently. If only it were his face. I wanted to break his heart by the time he arrived back home, but I wanted it to really hurt. I logged into our joint RuneScape account that we had made several years ago, where him and I would work on training the same account and raising it almost like our baby. We'd always joked that if we were to ever split up, he would take half of the account's bank contents and I would take the rest. I took my half and transferred it to my main account before taking his half and giving it away to random people throughout the game. Every last bit of it. Even items I couldn't normally trade away, I used a spell to convert the items into coins, which I then gave away as well. The bank was now empty. It then occurred to me that I had the credentials to his main account and they were written down on my desk, as he would frequently have me train his farming skill every so often. I didn't hesitate at all and logged into his precious 14-year-old RuneScape account. I immediately took all of the contents of his bank and sold it all on the Grand Exchange, which is a marketplace in the game. It took an extremely long time to clear out his bank, but he would still be flying home for another 4 hours, so I had plenty of time. By the time I had sold and destroyed everything, I had 4 stacks of coins totaling over 8.5 billion. Now, what to spend it on? I wanted to waste his life earnings on the most useless, stupid thing I could think of besides him. I logged back into my main account to reach out to a friend of mine that collects massive stacks of burnt food. For the unaware, burnt food in RuneScape has no use. You can't unburn them, eat them, or even sell them on the Grand Exchange. They are, however, tradable amongst players. I've always poked fun at this guy for collecting burnt food, but now I was more thankful than ever to make his acquaintance in my revenge. I asked him what the most obscure, unwanted item was of the burnt food variety, and he replied, burnt spider. Lo and behold, he had roughly 6,000 of the item, spider on shaft, burnt, in his bank that he was willing to sell me. Feeling generous with my ex-boyfriend's coins, I gave my friend the full stack of 2.147 billion coins and left a very happy customer. I dropped the 6,083 burnt spiders in his bank, but still had about 6 billion coins left to spend. With the remaining money, I decided to treat myself. I went onto the Grand Exchange and ended up going on a shopping spree. The first thing I bought were 100 bonds. If you're not familiar, a bond in RuneScape grants you 14 days of in-game membership. After trading all 100 bonds to my account, I now have almost 4 years of membership paid for me. I spent a majority of his coins on extremely nice armor and weapons, all of which went straight into my account. He still had about an extra billion, so I spent it on the supplies I needed to level up an expensive skill of mine. By the end of the afternoon, he was left with a measly 150,000 coins in his bank, all of which I gave away to a guy cooking pizzas outside of the exchange. Nothing was left, so I decided to pick up a pile of bones off the ground and leave it solely in his bank. It might sound petty, but I laughed for a while. Now, I know what you're thinking. This is so cruel. You've ruined the tens of thousands of hours he had put into a game. Well, it was time that he learned that I can be a witch, a mean witch. On top of spending every last coin he ever had made, I leveled his defense skill. This may not sound bad. In fact, it sounds like a good thing. I helped his account progress, right? Well, no. Unfortunately for my ex, he had what players commonly refer to as a pure account, meaning he never, ever dared to level his defense skill from level 1 in order to keep the lowest defense stats but have high offensive stats. Well, not anymore. Have fun with your permanent level 6 defense. Cycling through hundreds of possible forms of revenge in my head, I settled on getting rid of his house. It's quite an achievement in RuneScape to have a nice house of your own, and in fact, he had one of the nicest I had ever seen in the game. In order to have built it, he must have spent well over a few billion coins. Too bad I had disassembled it all in a matter of minutes, deleting it all into cyberspace. And there's no insurance either. He's going to have to rebuy everything with his non-existent money if he wants a new house. Bye-bye, Casa de Cheater. Scrolling through his friends list, I decided to act as him and pay a visit to his friends who are currently online and admit that I had cheated on my girlfriend and was fully proud of it. If his friends hadn't removed him by that point, I removed them. All of them. Lastly, to add a beautiful little cherry to this revenge-filled cake, I changed his username. You're able to change your username once a month on RuneScape, so I changed his to let everybody know that he's a dirty cheater. I obviously won't drop his username here, but I did the best I could to embarrass him with the 12-character limit. He should be able to reclaim his previous username in about 3 weeks, but if he waits too long, I'll be able to swipe it and slap it on a throwaway account of my own forever. He sent me a very hateful and aggressive message later that night, followed by pictures of him crying. I wrote him a sincere message officially ending the relationship, while also scaring him away by threatening to take him to court over sharing my nudes and possibly filing a cease and desist if he were to contact me anytime soon. I don't plan on doing any of that. I just don't want to speak to him ever again.
Karen was annoyed that I didn't evenly divide 7 by 2, posted by Meth Hardy. I used to work for a company where we went into schools in our area to perform a free 1-hour wacky science show teaching kids the importance of saving water. Our local area relies on aquifers, which are underground porous rock that stores rainfall, for the majority of our water, so it's important to teach kids both about how the water cycle works where we live and about not wasting water. This incident occurred 5 years ago and it just came on my Facebook memories, and it very much fits this sub. Myself and my colleague were at a school in a very affluent area performing our water show, teaching the kids in our own unimitatable, irreverent way. The school had invited parents into the assembly, so we had about 30 or so parents seated at the back of the hall along with the 200 or so kids. After the show, which went down an absolute treat, my colleague had gone to collect the car, which we couldn't park near the school, while I had remained behind to tidy up and move all of our kit to the front entrance to the school where he would be pulling up. Suddenly, a parent came up to speak to me. Karen says, "Hello, do you mind if I have a quick word?" I reply, "Yeah, of course not." "Well, let me start off by telling you how fantastic that show was." I'm waiting for the but I say, "Hey, thank you very much." "But," my internal monologue says, "there it is. I was wondering if you noticed that you had picked more boys than girls as your volunteers, rather than an equal number of each." Okay, you're asking me if I realized that I didn't pick an equal number of boys and girls as my volunteers? Yes. Yes, I was aware of this, mainly because we need an odd number of volunteers in the show. It's very difficult to keep the numbers of each equal when the total number is odd. Karen looks at me while trying to think. Did you notice that while we picked 4 boys and 2 girls for the aquifer experiment, we picked a girl as the solo volunteer for the toothbrushing experiment? And the toothbrushing volunteer does a lot more than the aquifer volunteers do. So, yesterday when we did this exact same show in a different school, we had 4 girls and 2 boys for the aquifer experiment, and then a boy for the toothbrush. We always try to keep things as fair as possible. I'm just saying because my daughters were here today, and I want them to enjoy science. Well, hopefully they did. I also noticed that on your banner, and she indicates the pop-up banner off to one side, that you have 2 boys and 1 girl on that. That's hardly equal. Yeah, that is true, but with the size of the banner, 3 children was the right number. 2 would have left too much empty space, while 4 would have been too crowded. Then why didn't they pick 2 girls? Well, because we made several mock-ups of the banner and showed them to different children, and the most popular design was that one. Well, I don't think... I interrupt and say, you may be pleased to see that the fun pack that each child gets to take home has only 1 boy and 1 girl on the cover. I pick up the pack and I show her. That's nice. Karen walks off and the teacher comes over to me. The teacher says, hey, what was all that about? Apparently, I need to find a way to pick an equal number of boys and girls despite the total number adding up to an odd total. Okay, so because you didn't pick either of her 2 daughters as any of your handful of volunteers out of 200 children in the school? It would seem that way, teacher. What did you say to her? Basically that 7 isn't divisible by 2, but across multiple schools we make sure to keep things equal. And what did she say? That's nice.
Kevin doesn't know what mold is, posted by Kentucky Fried Soy. My brother, the Kevin in this story, has never been the sharpest tool in the shed. He believes that dolphins cause cancer, but we aren't here to discuss that. One day, Kevin was eating a croissant and asking when we got blue cheese croissants. He was saying how delicious they were and when was the soonest we would have more. This was odd because the last time we bought croissants was weeks ago. I saw him holding a croissant that was covered in blue mold and just happily munching away at it. I told him that it was moldy and not safe to eat, but he insisted it was fine because it all tastes good to me. I threw out all the rest when he wasn't looking, so he couldn't eat any more blue cheese croissants. Oh, so y'all want to know about the dolphins? Okay, so about 5 or 6 years ago, Kevin was a young adolescent. We still had some hope his brain would develop further. He's very curious and loves to ask questions, so I was explaining how electromagnetic waves work in simple terms, and that electromagnetic waves with really high frequencies can cause cancer. He looks shocked and asks, wait, does that mean that dolphins cause cancer? I had to keep questioning Kevin to figure out how on earth he came up with this conclusion. He thought that 1, electromagnetic waves and the waves in the ocean are the same, and 2, that all waves in the ocean are created by the movements of dolphins. Thus, he concluded, dolphins cause cancer. Dullest knife in the drawer, posted by Curious Cat 0070. I was visiting an associated section in our organization and knew the people in that section, at least in passing. As I walked by his desk, the admin assistant asked me, hey OP, what work status is Jenny on? I'm trying to do the time cards. Hey man, I really have no idea. I don't work down here. Well, I really need to know what status she's on because we're closing out the work week. Look, I'd love to tell you, but I work upstairs, not down here. But what's her work status? I'm trying to finish the time cards. You know, that's a great question for someone who actually works down here. But I need to know her work status. Can you tell me that? I could tell you the airspeed velocity of an unladen swallow, but I have no idea what her work status is because I don't work down here. It's a Monty Python reference. Huh? Oh, so what's her work status? You know, I think we're just going to have to chalk that up as one of the great mysteries of the universe, I said, and then broke eye contact and walked away.
The HOA demands that I follow their rules, but I'm not even in the HOA. Click the video on your screen so you don't miss the fallout of this one, and I will see you there.